Exploration Part 2 required us to follow on from the work undertaken in Dialogue Part 1, allowing us the opportunity to build on research and experimentation. My partner for this project, Joe, and I decided to stay in our allocated pair because we felt we'd only just touched the surface of Dialogue Part 1 and still had some ideas and concepts we wanted to explore further. We discussed our plan of action with Glenn and Chris to ensure it was okay to proceed. We chose option 1 from the brief to continue to explore, experiment and develop ideas and to continue with the dialogue we've made so far. As a pair, we decided not to work on our 3 ideas together, but to experiment separately, meet to discuss our findings and then separate again to explore further. We decided that Joe would explore the vase concept, we would both explore the suspended shadows concept, and I would explore the jewellery frame concept. For my part of the experimentation with the suspended shadows concept, I took inspiration from Rashad Alakbarov and his installation Fly to Baku, which uses suspended pieces of glass to cast a colourful shadow on the wall. The installation is inspiring because the suspended pieces on their own look very randomly hung. However, once the light hits them, the shadow cast causes the suspended glass pieces to form an image of a beach, complete with mountains in the distance and boats on the water. I decided that for my experiment, instead of suspending objects to cast a shadow, I would make a box that layers of glass could slot into. The box would be made from metal, and the glass would be clear with sandblasted patterns or screen printed patterns on it. Each layer of glass would have a different part of the overall design on it. It would not be apparent what the overall design was until the light shone onto the box through all of the layers of glass and cast the whole image onto something or someone. This is a prototype of my design I made using recycled cardboard to represent the metal box and clear acetate to represent the glass. I chose to use these materials to see if the idea would work before using metal and glass, because I knew making the glass sheets and the metal box would be a long process, and I only had a short time frame for the remainder of this project and still the jewellery frame idea to explore. To decide what image I could have on the glass pieces, I started thinking about how a shadow could transform a person, like wearing a mask. The illusion would be that the person standing in front of the shadow could become someone else, for example, a member of an Amazonian tribe. I used recycled card again to create what would be the sandblasted design on the glass. I then layered the acetate in the box and shone a torch onto it to see the result. The shadows did not come out how I expected, and it did not look as elusive as I'd hoped. This was not helped by the fact that my torch has multiple LEDs in it, which blurred the shadow. For my idea to work, and for a person to be properly transformed by a shadow, it needs to be crisp. This idea will also only work if the object casting the shadow cannot be seen or is disguised. The shadow needs to surprise the viewer and create a strong dialogue. To begin exploration of the jewellery frame concept, I've taken inspiration from Lane Vorster again, as I did in Dialogue Part 1. Lane Vorster uses sharp angles and lines to create simple structural pieces that rest on the body and cast shadows that extend the piece of jewellery. Although the jewellery is not very wearable on a day-to-day basis, the shadows cast are. It's a shame though that the shadow jewellery will disappear when the metal jewellery is removed. I've also looked at the frame collection by Carol Hunt. Carol Hunt uses precious materials such as silver and diamonds to create these structural and linear pieces. For the jewellery frame I'd like to create, I need to be able to set glass into it somewhere to cast shadows across the body, so I'll be using Carol Hunt's idea but adapting it to fit my requirements. I will also begin my making with copper to make the process a lot less expensive and also in case it doesn't work. I thought about the possibilities for a piece of sandblasted glass to sit in the necklace frame. My problem was how to connect the glass to the copper frame. I decided on a slot in the copper that the glass could sit in and be secured with a nut and bolt at the back. When the necklace is worn and the wearer walks under a light, the shadows will cast across the body. After making the copper necklace frame and one piece of clear sandblasted glass to slot into it, I thought about how I could make other pieces of glass that could slot into the frame to make it an interactive piece. I made 2 more pieces of glass, the same size, that can also slot into the frame so the wearer can choose which shadow they'd like to wear. The necklace frame sits well on the body and the glass is not very visible from straight on, which is what I was aiming for, an illusion. I wanted to create a piece that was not on its own aesthetically pleasing, but only with the addition of shadows. However, the shadow cast is not large enough to really make an impact and create a strong dialogue with the audience. If I were to make this piece again, I would make the glass piece longer so it stuck out further from the body. I would also only use clear glass because the textured glass refracts the light too much and disrupts the sandblasted pattern. I would also look into screen printing the glass to make the pattern more visible in the shadow, because less light would be able to pass through a screen printed pattern. The main reason for this module was to create 3 dialogues. I have created a strong dialogue between the maker and the material by using glass and metal to create shadows. I have had to think a lot about how to connect the metal and glass to create interesting shadows. Every time I did an experiment by shining the light onto an object to make a shadow, I had to either respond by getting a different object, changing the angle of the light, or by getting another light source. I have also created another dialogue between the maker and the material because I've been working in glass, which is not my usual specialism. Combining the glass and metal was a challenge because I couldn't solder the glass onto the metal. Instead, I had to use cold connections. I have also created a dialogue between the material and the process because using different materials requires different processes to bring them to a finish. Each time I cracked a piece of glass or chipped the sides, I learnt a new technique to not let it happen again. I learnt how differently the glass behaves compared to the metal. I also found that to hold the glass, my metal pieces had to be bigger. I usually work with silver rings, so changing to large copper frames created another dialogue between the maker and material because I had to discover alternative ways to cut, solder and polish the material. Finally, questions raised in our work have created a dialogue between the audience and the object. Is it conceptual? Is it anything? What does it mean to be something? What does it mean to be nothing? I found this a difficult project because after 2 years of this degree, I'd already decided what I enjoy making, my main inspirations and the materials and processes I like to use. Being put in pairs with someone from another practice completely threw this off balance. Being forced to work with different materials and processes was hard. I feel that for Dialogue Part 1, Joe and I worked really well together experimenting. It was good to have someone to talk to and discuss ideas in this part of the project. For this project, we both travelled down the same path. However, when we moved into continuing the conversation Part 2, I found that our ideas became very different and it became harder to work together. We began to communicate less, and when we did speak, it was like we were doing 2 separate projects. As a jeweller, I began focusing on how shadows and light look on the body, and as a glass artist, Joe focused on how shadows and light look on objects. I feel that I have experimented a lot in this project and created a good dialogue. However, I found it difficult not to create a final piece. Experimenting with no end result is not what I'm used to. If I had longer on this module, I would experiment even more with glass. I would make stained glass, experiment with different cold connections and learn to acid etch and screen print glass. I feel that my confidence in research and decision making has increased by completing this project. Our creating something from nothing concept has pushed me to take part in experiments and create objects that have strong messages behind them. Making items that do not look pleasant and only focusing on how the shadows cast look has been difficult because I'm usually such a perfectionist. However, the point of this work was to create something that looked horrible to contrast the beautiful shadows cast across the wearer. I found that shadows are not simply a dark mass that borders the light, rather shadows are an entity as alive as the light. It is the shadows that shape the light and draw attention to it, the beauty within, hidden depths within the pieces and creating something from nothing.